The slap echoed through the shack like a gunshot, and Lila Warren tasted copper on her split lip. Jonas Creed stood over her, whiskey drunk and mean, his fist cocked for another blow. This was marriage in the Arizona Badlands' brutal, suffocating final. But tonight something shifted in Lila's chest. Tonight she would choose: stay and die slowly, or run and risk dying fast. Either way, the girl she'd been was already gone. This is her story, a tale of blood dust and redemption under the unforgiving western sky. Stay with me until the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lila's journey travels across this world. The desert wind carried no mercy that October evening, just grit and the promise of another cold night in the Arizona territory. Lila Warren pressed her back against the splintered wall of the shack she'd been calling home for 3 years, though home was a word that had lost all meaning somewhere between the wedding vows and the first time Jonas Creed's palm met her cheekbone. She was 22 years old. She felt ancient. The single room reeked of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and something else, something sour and defeated that Lila had come to recognize as the smell of her own fear. The oil lamp flickered on the rough-hewn table, casting shadows that danced across Jonas's face as he swayed in the doorway, his belt buckle undone, his eyes glassy and cold. "You think you can look at me like that?" His words slurred together, thick and dangerous. "Like I'm some kind of animal." Lila said nothing. 3 years had taught her that silence was survival. Words were weapons he could use against her, twist into justifications for his fists. But silence was a fortress he couldn't breach, though God knows he tried. "I'm talking to you, woman." Jonas lurched forward, and Lila's body tensed instinctively, every muscle coiled for the impact she knew was coming. "You think you're better than me? You think your daddy's money makes you something special?" Her daddy's money. The lie that had brought her here to this hell on earth. Jonas had courted her in Tucson with sweet words and promises of a ranch of a life under open skies. He'd been handsome then, or she'd been foolish enough to think so, tall and broad-shouldered with a crooked smile that made her 17-year-old heart stutter. Her father, a shopkeeper with more debts than sense, had been eager to marry her off. "He's got prospects," her father had said. "He's got land." The land turned out to be 40 acres of dust and rattlesnakes. The prospects turned out to be bottle after bottle of rotgut whiskey, purchased on credit from every saloon between here and Tombstone. And the man turned out to be a monster, wearing a wedding ring. "Answer me!" Jonas's roar shattered her thoughts. His hand shot out, catching her across the mouth. Her head snapped back, skull-cracking against the wall. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She tasted blood, warm and metallic, pooling on her tongue. "There," Jonas said, his voice dropping to something almost tender, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "That's better. That's the respect I deserve." He staggered toward the table, groping for the bottle. "You're lucky I keep you, you know that. Ain't another man in the territory would take damaged goods like you." Damaged goods. The words landed like stones in her chest. She'd heard them so many times they'd almost stopped hurting. Almost. Lila's fingers found her split lip, came away red. She watched Jonas tip the bottle back, throat-working whiskey, dribbling down his chin into his matted beard. This was her husband. This was the man she'd promised before God and witnesses to love, honor, and obey. But God felt very far away from this shack, and love had never lived here at all. "I saw you today," Jonas said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Saw you talking to that Mexican kid at Benson's store. Saw you smiling at him." "I was buying flour," Lila whispered. Her voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "Just flour, that's all." "Just flour." Jonas's laugh was ugly, jagged. "You think I'm stupid. You think I don't see the way men look at you, even beat up like you are they look. They want." He took another long pull from the bottle. "Well, you're mine. Mine to do with as I please. You understand that—" She understood. Oh, she understood perfectly. She was property, same as the broken-down mule in the corral outside, same as the rusted plow, and the 3 scrawny chickens that wouldn't lay. She was inventory in a failing enterprise, valuable only insofar as Jonas decided she was. But tonight something was different. Tonight, as Lila touched her bleeding lip and watched her husband drink himself toward oblivion, she felt something shift deep in her chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too bright a word for what flickered in the darkness of her ribs. This was smaller, harder. This was the cold, sharp edge of a decision. Right here. Jonas was mumbling now, the bottle nearly empty. Right now. That's all a man has, right here, right now. He always got philosophical when he was three-quarters drunk, maudlin, and meandering. In another hour, he'd pass out. He always did. Right here, right now, Lila echoed softly. Jonas's head snapped up suspicious even through the whiskey fog. What'd you say? Nothing. She dropped her eyes, made herself small. Nothing at all. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded satisfied. That's right. Nothing. That's what you are without me. Nothing at all. He drained the last of the whiskey and threw the bottle against the wall. It shattered glass raining down near Lila's bare feet. She didn't flinch, couldn't afford to. Jonas stumbled toward the bed, a mattress stuffed with straw that poked through the ticking, covered with a single thin blanket they'd received as a wedding gift from a neighbor woman who'd since moved back east. Smart woman. He collapsed onto it with a groan, boots still on belt undone. Come here, he mumbled. Lila's stomach turned. You're tired, she said carefully. You should sleep. I said come here. She moved slowly, placing one foot in front of the other, her mind racing. Not tonight. Please God, not tonight. She couldn't bear it tonight, not with her lips still bleeding, not with her head still ringing from where it had hit the wall. Not tonight. But Jonas's eyes were already closing, his breathing deepening. The whiskey was claiming him, pulling him down into its dark embrace. Lila stood at the edge of the bed, watching, waiting. 1 minute passed, then 2. His chest rose and fell with the deep, steady rhythm of unconsciousness. She waited 5 more minutes, counting her own heartbeats, before she allowed herself to believe it. He was out. He'd be out for hours until dawn broke and his hangover screamed him awake already, mean already reaching for another bottle. But Lila wouldn't be here for that. Her hands trembled as she moved through the shack, gathering what little she could carry. A spare dress rolled tight, a shawl her mother had given her before the wedding. A piece of hardtack wrapped in cloth. The small knife Jonas used for cleaning game, she took that too, slipping it into the pocket of her dress. Her fingers brushed against something else in the corner where she kept her few belongings, her mother's small leather-bound Bible, the only thing of her parents she had left. She clutched it to her chest for a moment, then tucked it carefully into her bundle. She had no money. Jonas kept what little they had in his pockets, and she didn't dare reach for it while he slept. Men like Jonas slept light, even drunk. Especially drunk. But she had her feet, she had the darkness. She had the vast empty desert stretching in every direction indifferent to human suffering, which meant it was also indifferent to human hope. Lila paused at the door, looking back one final time at the shack, at the man snoring on the bed, at the 3 years of her life that lay shattered on that floor like the whiskey bottle. She should feel something, shouldn't she? Sadness, regret, fear. But all she felt was tired. Bone-deep, soul-sick tired. And beneath that, far beneath, buried under layers of pain and silence, she felt something else. Something that might have been the girl she used to be, the one who'd believed in love stories and happy endings, the one who'd thought marriage meant partnership instead of prison. That girl reached out and opened the door. The night air hit Lila's face like baptism, cool and clean. She stepped over the threshold barefoot because Jonas had thrown her shoes at her last week, and they'd landed in the fire pit because barefoot was one more way to keep her from running. But she was running now. The desert floor was rough beneath her feet, rocks and thorns biting into her soles as she moved away from the shack. She didn't look back. Looking back was how Lot's wife became salt, and Lila had already been preserved in pain long enough. The stars overhead were cold and bright, indifferent witnesses to her escape. She walked toward them, toward nothing, toward anywhere that wasn't here. Behind her, the shack grew smaller, its single light dimming until it was just another dying star in the darkness. She walked for an hour before the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the sharp reality of what she'd done. She'd left. Just left. Without a plan, without money, without shoes. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and she had no idea which way led to salvation and which to death. In the Arizona territory, those two destinations weren't always distinct from one another. Her feet were bleeding now, leaving small dark prints on the pale sand. Each step sent jolts of pain up her legs, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. Jonas would wake eventually, and when he did, when he found her gone, she pushed the thought away. One step, then another. That's all she could manage. One step at a time, into the unknown. The moon rose higher, painting the desert silver. Lila's shadow stretched long and thin before her, a dark version of herself leading the way. She followed it, trusting in nothing but the act of moving forward, of putting distance between herself and the life she'd left behind. She didn't see the rocks until she was tumbling over them, her ankle-twisting body pitching forward. She landed hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. For a moment she just lay there, cheek pressed against the cold sand, staring at the stars spinning overhead. "Get up," something inside her whispered. "Get up or die here." But her body had other ideas. Her ankle throbbed, her feet screamed, her head pounded where it had struck the wall hours earlier. Every part of her hurt, and the hurt was spreading, growing, filling her up until there was nothing left but pain and exhaustion. Just for a minute, she told herself. Just rest for a minute. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the sky had shifted. How long had she been unconscious? Minutes, hours. The stars had wheeled overhead, distant and unconcerned. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Her legs were distant countries, unreachable, unresponsive. This is how it ends, she thought with strange clarity. Not in Jonas's shack, but here under the open sky. Maybe that was better. Maybe that was a kind of freedom too. Something moved in her peripheral vision. A shape darker than the darkness around it, tall and broad-shouldered. A man. Terror flooded through her, jolting her body back to life. Jonas. He'd found her. He'd come to drag her back, and this time, he'd make sure she never ran again. "Please," she tried to say, but her voice came out as a whisper, thin and broken. "Please, no." The figure moved closer. Resolved itself into features, a weathered face, a battered hat, eyes that caught the moonlight and reflected something that might have been surprise. Not Jonas. This man was older, leaner, his face lined with years of sun and sorrow. "Jesus Christ," the man said, his voice rough but not unkind. "What in the hell?" He dropped to his knees beside her, and Lila tried to scramble away, but her body had nothing left to give. The man held up his hands, palms out. "I'm not going to hurt you, he said. He paused, seemed to consider his words. "My name's Eli Boone. I was just..." He gestured vaguely behind him, and Lila saw in the distance the angular shapes of headstones. A cemetery. "I was visiting my wife." A cemetery. Boot Hill, probably she'd heard of it, though she'd never been. The graveyard where they buried the outlaws and drifters, the men who died with their boots on and their sins unconfessed. "Are you hurt?" Eli asked. His hands hovered over her, uncertain. "Can you talk? Tell me your name." "Lila," she managed. Her lips were cracked, her throat desert dry. "Lila Warren." "Warren?" Eli repeated. His eyes sharpened. Not Jonas Creed's wife. The name sent ice through her veins. She tried to sit up, panic giving her a burst of strength. "He'll come looking," she gasped. "He'll find me. He'll..." "Easy, easy." Eli's hand came down gently on her shoulder, steadying her. "You're running from him." It wasn't a question. Lila nodded anyway, tears suddenly hot on her cheeks. I can't go back. I can't." Eli studied her face in the moonlight, taking in the split lip, the bruises she knew were darkening her cheekbone, her jaw. His expression hardened into something cold and certain. "No," he said quietly. "You can't." He stood, and for one terrible moment, Lila thought he was going to leave her there, walk away, and let the desert have her. It would be easier that way, wouldn't it? Safer. Getting involved in another man's marriage, that was a good way to end up in Boot Hill yourself. But Eli didn't walk away. He bent, scooping her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Lila was too exhausted to protest, too broken to care that she was being carried by a stranger through the desert night. His chest was solid beneath her cheek, his heartbeat steady and strong. "I've got a ranch." Eli said, his voice rumbling through his chest. About 2 miles south. You can rest there, get cleaned up, figure out what comes next. Why? The word slipped out before Lila could stop it. Why would you help me? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his boots crunching on the sand as he walked. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. My wife, Sarah. She's buried back there in Boot Hill. She was running from someone too when I met her. Her father, as it happens. Mean son of a bitch who thought he owned her. His arms tightened slightly around Lila. I helped her then, but I was too late to save her from the fever that took her 2 years later. So I reckon... He paused. I reckon I owe the world one good turn. Might as well be tonight. Lila closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. Somewhere behind them, the shack waited empty now, Jonas snoring on his straw mattress, unaware that his property had walked away on bloody feet. Somewhere ahead, the future waited, uncertain and dangerous. But right here, right now, in the arms of a stranger who smelled like tobacco and honest sweat, Lila Warren felt something she hadn't felt in 3 long years. She felt safe. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The desert wind sang its lonely song. And Eli Boone carried a broken woman toward something that might have been hope, or might have been just another kind of ending. Either way, Lila had chosen. She'd walked out that door. She'd taken the first step. Everything that came after blood or salvation, death or life, would be hers to face. Not as Jonas Creed's wife, not as damaged goods, not as nothing, just as Lila, just as herself. And that in the vast and brutal Arizona territory was the most dangerous thing a woman could be. Eli's ranch appeared like a mirage in the pre-dawn darkness, a low-slung adobe structure with a sagging porch and a corral that had seen better days. It wasn't much, certainly nothing like the grand ranches Lila had imagined when Jonas had promised her a life under open skies, but after 3 years in that one-room shack, it looked like a palace. Eli kicked the door open with his boot, careful not to jostle Lila as he carried her across the threshold. The interior was sparse but clean, a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner covered with a patchwork quilt. The smell of wood smoke and coffee lingered in the air, mixing with something else, leather and sage, and the particular loneliness that clung to places where only one person lived. I'll put you in the bed, Eli said, his voice breaking the silence. I can sleep in the chair. No, Lila protested weakly. I can't. You don't have to. You're bleeding on my floor, Eli interrupted not unkindly. And you can barely hold your head up. Don't argue with me, Mrs. Warren. I'm too old and too tired for arguing. He laid her gently on the bed, and Lila's body seemed to melt into the mattress, every muscle finally releasing the tension it had held for hours, for years. The quilt smelled like sunshine, and something floral lavender, maybe. A woman's touch, even in death. Eli moved to the fireplace, coaxing the embers back to life with practiced efficiency. The flames caught, casting warm light across the room, and for the first time Lila could see him clearly. He was older than she'd first thought, 40, maybe 45, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. His hair was dark but threaded with silver, and his hands as they worked were scarred and calloused from years of hard labor. But his face held a gentleness that made Lila's chest ache with something she couldn't name. I'm going to tend to your feet, Eli said, filling a basin with water from a pitcher. They're torn up pretty bad. This is going to hurt. Lila nodded, too exhausted to care about pain anymore. Pain was just another constant, like the sun rising or the wind blowing. You endured it because there was no other choice. Eli knelt beside the bed, his movements careful and methodical as he examined her feet in the firelight. His jaw tightened at what he saw, but he said nothing. He simply dipped a clean cloth into the water and began washing away the blood and dirt, his touch as gentle as if he were handling something precious and easily broken. Lila bit down on her lip to keep from crying out as the water stung the raw flesh, tasting blood all over again from where Jonas had split it earlier. Eli noticed. I've got whiskey, he offered. Not much, but enough to take the edge off. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. No whiskey. Eli's eyes met hers, understanding flickering in their depths. All right then, no whiskey. He returned his attention to her feet, wrapping them carefully in strips of clean cloth. You're going to need to stay off these for a few days at least. Walking on them now would just make things worse. I can't stay here, Lila said, even as her body betrayed her words, sinking deeper into the mattress. Jonas will come looking. When he wakes up and finds me gone, he'll... Let him come. Eli's voice was flat final. He stood moving to a cabinet against the wall and retrieving a gun belt that he strapped around his hips with the ease of long practice. The Colt that hung there looked well used but well maintained, the metal gleaming dully in the firelight. This is my land. He's got no right here. You don't understand. Lila struggled to sit up, ignoring the protest of her body. Jonas doesn't care about rights. He thinks I'm his property. He'll kill you if you get in his way. He'll... Mrs. Warren. Eli turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made the words die in her throat. I've killed men before, in the war and after. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. Sometimes killing is what's required to protect what matters, and right now, he paused, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. Right now what matters is making sure you're safe. So if Jonas Creed wants to come calling, let him. We'll have a conversation, him and me. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made something warm bloom in Lila's chest, something dangerous and unfamiliar. Hope, maybe. Or trust. She'd forgotten what either felt like. Why are you doing this? She asked again, needing to understand. You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to a daguerreotype on the mantel, a woman with kind eyes and dark hair smiling softly at the camera. His wife. Sarah. You're not nothing, he said finally. You're a woman who had the courage to run. That's not nothing. That's everything. He moved to the stove, pouring coffee from a battered pot into 2 tin cups. My Sarah, she ran too. From her father, like I said, mean bastard who thought women were made to serve and suffer. She showed up on my doorstep half dead, just like you. I took her in and... His voice caught just slightly. We had 2 good years. 2 years of laughter and quiet mornings and feeling like maybe the world wasn't all thorns and blood. Then the fever came and I couldn't... He stopped, shook his head. I couldn't save her. He handed Lila a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. His skin was warm, rough, real. So I reckon this is my second chance, Eli continued. Maybe I can't bring Sarah back, but I can help you. And maybe that counts for something in the grand scheme of things. He smiled, but it was sad around the edges. Or maybe I'm just a lonely old fool, looking for a purpose before I join Sarah in Boot Hill. Either way, you're staying here until you're healed. After that, what you do is your own choice. But right now, you're too broken to choose anything. Lila sipped the coffee, letting the bitter warmth spread through her. She wanted to argue, to insist she leave before dawn, before Jonas could track her here. But her body had already made its decision, shutting down like a house closing for winter. Her eyes were heavy, her thoughts fuzzy and distant. Thank you, she whispered. It seemed inadequate, those 2 small words, but they were all she had. Sleep, Eli said gently. I'll keep watch. Nothing's going to hurt you tonight. And somehow, impossibly, Lila believed him. Her eyes drifted, closed, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. The last thing she registered was the sound of Eli settling into the chair by the fireplace, the quiet click of him checking his Colt's chambers, and the strange foreign sensation of feeling protected instead of threatened by a man's presence. When she woke, daylight was streaming through the windows in golden bars, dust motes dancing in the beams like tiny stars. For a moment, Lila forgot where she was and panic seized her chest. The shack, Jonas, the inevitable morning violence that followed his drinking. But then memory returned, the run through the desert, the cemetery, Eli's steady arms carrying her to safety. She was in his bed, covered with his dead wife's quilt, and her feet throbbed with a pain that was somehow cleaner than the pain she was used to. This pain was healing, not breaking. There was a difference. Eli was still in the chair, his head tilted back, eyes closed. His Colt lay across his lap, his fingers still resting near the trigger, even in sleep. A man who'd learned to rest without ever fully letting go of his vigilance. Lila understood that instinct. She'd lived it for 3 years. She tried to sit up, and the movement must have made some sound because Eli's eyes snapped open immediately, hand tightening on the gun before he registered who she was and where they were. He relaxed, but only slightly. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" "Like I ran barefoot through the desert and passed out in a cemetery." Lila answered, surprised to find she could almost smile. "So better than usual, I suppose." Eli's mouth quirked. "That's a low bar, Mrs. Warren." "Lila," she corrected. "Just Lila. I don't want to be Mrs. anything anymore." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lila, then." He stood stretching out the kinks from a night in the chair. "I'll make breakfast. You need to eat something, build up your strength. I should help." "You should stay in that bed and let those feet heal," Eli interrupted firmly. "I've been cooking for myself for 2 years. I think I can manage eggs without supervision." Lila watched him move around the small kitchen area with the efficiency of a man long accustomed to solitude. He fried eggs in a cast-iron skillet, sliced bread from a loaf wrapped in cloth, poured fresh coffee. The domesticity of it was jarring a man cooking breakfast, not because he was drunk and demanding service, but simply because it needed doing, because someone needed caring for. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than the questions racing through her mind. 10 years, give or take." Eli cracked another egg into the pan. "Bought the land with money I saved from the war. It's not much, 40 acres, a dozen head of cattle, some chickens. But it's mine. Free and clear. No bank, no creditors, no one to answer to." "That sounds like heaven," Lila said softly. Eli glanced at her over his shoulder. "It's lonely," he admitted, "especially after Sarah passed. Some days I go from sunup to sundown without speaking a word out loud, just me and the livestock and the wind." He plated the eggs, brought them to her, along with bread and coffee. "But lonely is better than cruel. I learned that lesson young." They ate in comfortable silence. Lila propped up against pillows Eli had arranged behind her back. The eggs were good, better than anything she'd cooked in Jonas's shack, though that wasn't saying much. Jonas had complained about her cooking the way he complained about everything else, as if the food's inadequacy was a personal insult rather than a reflection of having nothing but hardtack and questionable meat to work with. "I need to check the fences today," Eli said when they'd finished. "Got a break in the south pasture that needs mending. I'll be gone a few hours, but—" He hesitated, his expression troubled. "I don't like leaving you here alone, not with Creed still out there." "He might not even know I'm gone yet," Lila said, though she didn't believe it. Jonas was a heavy sleeper when drunk, but morning always came eventually, and when it did, when he woke to find the shack empty, her few belongings gone, his rage would be biblical. "Maybe." Eli didn't sound convinced either. "But, just in case..." He retrieved a small pistol from a drawer, checked it was loaded, and placed it on the table beside the bed. "You know how to use one of these?" Lila stared at the gun as if it were a coiled snake. "My father taught me," she said slowly. Before everything. He said a woman should know how to protect herself." "Smart man." Eli pushed the pistol closer to her. "Keep it within reach. If anyone comes to that door who isn't me, you use it. Don't hesitate. Don't ask questions. Just shoot. Understand?" The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. This was real. This wasn't some dramatic story or fevered dream. She'd run from Jonas, and now there would be consequences. There were always consequences. "I understand," she whispered. Eli studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be as quick as I can. There's water in the pitcher food in the cupboard if you get hungry. Don't try to walk on those feet." He strapped on his gun belt, settled his hat on his head. "Lock the door behind me." After he left, the silence of the ranch pressed in around Lila like a physical thing. She could hear every creak of the adobe walls settling, every rustle of wind through the eaves. The pistol gleamed dully on the table, a small, dark promise of violence. She picked it up, testing its weight in her palm. It was smaller than Jonas's gun lighter, but no less deadly for it. Her father's voice echoed across the years. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull. And if you're going to point it at someone, be prepared to kill them. There's no such thing as warning shots in the real world, Lila girl." Lila girl. She'd been someone's daughter once, someone's hope for the future. Before Jonas. Before the shack and the whiskey and the endless nights of fear. She set the pistol back on the table and closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her back toward sleep. Her feet throbbed. Her head ached. Her lip was swollen and tender. But underneath all of that buried deep, something else stirred. Something that felt almost like strength. The sun climbed higher, pouring heat through the windows. Lila drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of dreams mixing with fragments of memory. Her mother's face kind but distant. Her father counting coins behind the shop counter. Jonas's smile on their wedding day. How had she ever thought that smile was charming? The first time he'd raised his hand to her, the shock of it, the way her mind had refused to process what was happening. This is my husband, she'd thought. Husbands they don't. But they did. Some of them did. And she'd spent 3 years learning that lesson in the hardest way possible. A sound jolted her awake, the creak of a floorboard, the soft scrape of boot leather on wood. Her hand flew to the pistol heart hammering against her ribs. The door. She'd forgotten to lock the door after Eli left. Stupid. So stupid. Mrs. Creed. The voice came from the other side of the room, and Lila's finger tightened on the trigger before her mind caught up with her ears. Not Jonas's voice. Someone else's. Younger, uncertain. She forced her eyes open, bringing the gun up, even though her hands were shaking. A boy stood in the doorway. No, not a boy, but not quite a man either. Maybe 19 or 20, with sandy hair and nervous eyes. He held his hands up, palms out. "Don't shoot," he said quickly. "Please don't shoot. My name's Tommy Dawson. I work for Jonas sometimes, running errands and such. I'm not here to hurt you, I swear it." "Get out." Lila's voice came out stronger than she expected. "Get out right now, or I'll—" "Jonas sent me." Tommy interrupted the words, tumbling out in a rush. "He woke up this morning and found you gone. He's Mrs. Creed. He's crazy with it. Drunk and mean and talking about what he's going to do when he finds you. The boy's face twisted with something that might have been shame. "I told him I'd help look, but really, I just wanted to warn you. To tell you to run as far as you can, because when he finds you—" "How did you know where to find me?" Lila demanded, the gun still trained on Tommy's chest. "I saw Eli Boone at Boot Hill last night late. Figured if anyone would help a woman in trouble, it'd be him. He's got that reputation, being decent." Tommy took a half step forward, then froze when Lila's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'm on your side, Mrs. Creed. I've seen what Jonas does, what he's capable of. My own ma—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "My ma had a husband like that once. It didn't end well for her." Lila's mind raced. This could be a trick. Jonas could have sent the boy to draw her out to confirm her location, or Tommy could be telling the truth, could be genuinely trying to help. Either way, he knew where she was now, which meant Jonas would know soon enough. "Where is he?" she asked. "Jonas, where is he now?" "Riding toward Tombstone when I left him," Tommy said. "Figured you'd try for the town look for help from the sheriff. But I knew better. I knew you'd be too scared to go somewhere Jonas could find you easy." He lowered his hand slowly. "You need to leave Mrs. Creed today. Now if you can. Because once Jonas figures out you're not in town, he'll start checking the homesteads. And Eli Boone's place, that'll be high on his list." The door burst open before Lila could respond, slamming against the wall with a crack like gunfire. Eli filled the doorway, his Colt drawn, and leveled at Tommy's head. "Step away from her," Eli said, his voice colder than Lila had heard it. "Now!" "Wait!" Lila started, but Tommy was already backing toward the far wall. Hands up again, his face gone white with fear. "Mr. Boone, I'm not—" "I know who you are, boy." Eli stepped into the room, his gun never wavering. "You run with Creed. I've seen you at the saloons in Benson laughing while he drinks and brags about keeping his woman in line." His finger rested on the trigger, steady and sure. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now." "He was warning me," Lila said quickly. "Eli, he was warning me that Jonas is looking. He's trying to help." Eli's eyes flicked to her, then back to Tommy. "That true, boy?" "Yes, sir." Tommy's voice shook. I never agreed with how Jonas treats Mrs. Creed, but he pays, and I need the money for my sister. She's sick, and the doctor... He stopped, seeming to realize his explanation didn't matter. I'm sorry. I should have done something sooner. Should have helped before now. You should have. Eli lowered the gun fractionally, though he didn't holster it. But you're here now, so talk. What's Creed planning? Tommy swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Eli and Lila. Like I told Mrs. Creed, he's in Tombstone now, but he'll figure out soon enough she's not there. Then he'll start searching. He's got 3 men with him, Sal Martinez, Dutch Keller, and some drifter. I don't know. They're all armed, and they're all mean. Jonas told them there's $20 in it for whoever finds you first. $20. Eli's laugh was bitter. That's what he thinks a human life is worth. $20 and a woman he can drag back to his shack. I've got maybe 6 hours, Tommy continued. Maybe less if Jonas sobers up enough to think straight. He'll come here, Mr. Boone. And when he does... The boy's gaze landed on Lila, something like pity in his eyes. You should run, ma'am. Both of you. There's no winning a fight with Jonas when he's like this. I'm not running for my own land, Eli said flatly. And Lila's in no condition to travel, so I reckon we'll be here when Creed comes calling. And we'll settle this like men, him and me. He'll kill you, Tommy said desperately. You don't understand. Jonas doesn't fight fair. He'll burn your ranch, shoot your livestock, do whatever it takes to get what he wants. And what he wants, his voice dropped, what he wants is to make an example, to show everyone what happens to women who run and men who help them. The words hung in the air like smoke, bitter and choking. Lila felt the truth of them settle into her bones. Of course Jonas would come. Of course he'd be violent. That's who he was, who he'd always been. She'd been foolish to think she could escape him by running a few miles into the desert. Then let him come, Eli said quietly. There was no bravado in his voice, no false courage, just acceptance. I've got ammunition and provisions. I've got good sight lines from the windows, and I've got something he doesn't. What's that? Tommy asked. Eli finally holstered his Colt, his expression hardening into something cold and determined. I've got a reason to fight that goes deeper than whiskey and pride. I'm fighting to protect something that matters. He's just fighting to keep something he thinks he owns. He turned to Lila. If you want to run, I'll help you. I'll give you my horse what money I have. But if you want to stay, if you want to make a stand, then we do this together. Your choice. Lila looked down at the pistol in her hands, then up at Eli's weathered face, at the resolve etched in every line. Tommy stood against the wall, young and scared, but trying to do right. And somewhere out there, Jonas rode with his men, drunk on rage and entitlement, determined to drag her back into hell. She'd spent 3 years making herself small, making herself silent, making herself into nothing, so Jonas couldn't find anything worth hurting. But sitting here in Eli's ranch, wrapped in his dead wife's quilt, holding a gun that could end a life or save one, Lila realized she was tired of being nothing. I'll stay, she said, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her gut. I'll fight. Eli nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. All right then, he turned to Tommy. You need to leave now, boy. Get as far from here as you can before Creed connects you to this. And Tommy. He waited until the young man met his gaze. Thank you for trying to do right. It matters even when it doesn't change the outcome. Tommy nodded, his throat working. He looked at Lila one last time, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement, maybe, or a prayer. Then he was gone, slipping out the door and disappearing into the bright desert morning. Eli closed the door behind him, locked it this time, then moved to the windows. He began pulling furniture into strategic positions, creating barriers and cover. His movements were practiced efficient, a soldier's movements. You were in the war, Lila said. It wasn't a question. 4 years. Eli didn't look up from his work. Infantry mostly, saw action at Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, learned how to kill men who were no different from me except for the color of their uniform. He dragged a heavy trunk in front of one window. Swore when it ended that I'd never raise a gun in anger again. Built this ranch as a place of peace somewhere the killing couldn't reach. He paused, his hands resting on the trunk. But I reckon peace only lasts until someone decides to break it. And then you either fight or you die. Sometimes both. Lila pushed herself up in the bed, ignoring the scream of protest from her feet. "Teach me," she said. "If they're coming, if we're going to fight, then teach me how to do it right. I won't just hide in this bed and wait to be taken." Eli turned to look at her, really look at her, and whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded. "All right. First lesson, never waste ammunition. Every shot has to count. You don't fire unless you're sure you can hit what you're aiming at." He gestured to the pistol she still held. "That's a .32 caliber. Not much stopping power, but accurate at close range. You'll need to be within 20 feet, preferably closer. Aim for the center of the chest, biggest target. Don't try for headshots. Too easy to miss." "Have you ever—" Lila hesitated. "Have you ever taught a woman to shoot to kill before?" "Sarah knew how," Eli said softly. "Insisted on it after we married. Said she never wanted to feel helpless again." His jaw tightened. "In the end, it didn't matter. Can't shoot a fever, can't kill death with a bullet." They spent the next hour preparing. Eli showed Lila how to reload the pistol quickly, how to steady her breathing before firing, how to use cover effectively. He positioned extra ammunition around the room, created firing positions at each window, filled buckets with water in case of fire. Every action was deliberate tactical. The movements of a man who'd learned warfare's hard lessons and never forgotten them. "They'll probably come at dusk," Eli said as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. "That's when I'd attack enough light to see but shadows to hide in. Jonas is mean and drunk, but he's not completely stupid. He'll try to use the terrain against us." Lila nodded, her palms sweating despite the relatively cool interior of the adobe. Her feet throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. But she pushed the pain aside, focused instead on what Eli was teaching her: how to survive, how to fight back. "If something happens to me," Eli said quietly, not looking at her, "you take my horse and ride for Tombstone. Find the sheriff, tell him everything. He's not much, but he's better than nothing. And Lila—" Now he did turn to face her. "Don't let them take you alive. You understand what I'm saying." She understood. She'd understood from the moment Tommy Dawson had spoken Jonas's name. There were fates worse than death, and she'd been living one for 3 years. She wouldn't go back to it. Not ever. "I understand," she said. The sun sank lower, painting the desert in shades of gold and blood. Eli checked his rifle one last time, his Colt the spare ammunition. Lila held her pistol and tried not to think about the weight of it, about what it would mean to point it at another human being and pull the trigger. They waited. The shadows grew longer. The desert wind picked up, rattling the windows, singing its lonely song. Somewhere in Boot Hill Cemetery, Sarah Boone rested beneath the earth, unaware that her husband was preparing to fight the same battle he'd fought for her years ago. Somewhere in Tombstone, Jonas Creed nursed his rage and his whiskey plotting violence. And in the small adobe ranch, Lila Warren sat with a loaded gun and realized that for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't waiting for someone to tell her what to do or how to feel or whether she was allowed to breathe. She was waiting to fight. And that made all the difference. The riders appeared just as Eli had predicted, materializing out of the desert dusk, like demons summoned from hell itself. 4 of them silhouettes against the dying light, moving with the careful deliberation of men who knew violence was coming and welcomed it. "There," Eli breathed, his eye pressed to a gap in the shuttered window. 4 riders, just like the boy said. "Jonas is in front, I can tell by the way he sits his horse, all swagger, even at a distance." Lila's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. She gripped the pistol with both hands, positioned at the window Eli had assigned her, and watched the riders approach. Even from here, even with the fading light making details uncertain, she knew Jonas, would have known him in complete darkness. 3 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the particular way he moved, the angle of his shoulders, the tilt of his head that meant danger was coming. "Remember what I taught you," Eli said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. "Don't fire until you have a clear shot. Make every bullet count. And Lila." He glanced at her, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Whatever happens, you did nothing wrong. You hear me?" "Nothing wrong." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Her mouth was desert dry, her palms slick with sweat, despite the cooling evening air. The riders were close enough now that she could hear the thud of hooves on hard-packed earth, the jingle of tack and spurs. Close enough that she could see Jonas's face beneath the brim of his hat, and God help her, he was smiling. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the ranch house just beyond easy rifle range. Smart. Jonas might be drunk and mean, but he hadn't survived this long in the territory by being completely reckless. The four men spread out slightly, creating multiple targets, making it harder for defenders to cover all angles simultaneously. "Boone!" Jonas's voice carried across the distance, loud and mocking. "Eli Boone, I know you're in there, you interfering son of a bitch. And I know you've got my wife." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Not yet. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Psychology was as much a part of warfare as bullets. "I'm giving you one chance," Jonas continued. "Send her out, and we ride away peaceful. Keep her, and we come in shooting, your choice, old man." "Old man." Eli muttered, a ghost of a smile flickering across his face. "I'm 43. That's not old." He raised his voice, projecting it through the gap in the shutter. "She's not your wife anymore, Creed. She's a free woman, and she's under my protection. You want her, you'll have to come through me." Jonas's laughter echoed across the darkening desert, harsh and ugly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say, boys." He addressed his companions. "The woman's worth $20 to whoever brings her out. And there's a bottle of the good stuff for whoever puts a bullet in Boone." The men spread out further, beginning to encircle the ranch house. Lila recognized one of them. Sal Martinez, a scarred Mexican who'd been drinking with Jonas at the general store once. He'd looked at her with dead eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much violence and had learned to enjoy it. The other two were strangers, but their intentions were clear enough. This wasn't going to end with talking. "Eli," Lila whispered, "there's 4 of them. How do we—" "We make them pay for every inch," Eli interrupted quietly. "We make it costly enough that they reconsider. And if that doesn't work—" He checked his rifle one more time. "We make sure they remember this day and whatever hell they end up in." One of the riders, the drifter Tommy had mentioned wearing a tattered Confederate cavalry coat, spurred his horse forward, breaking from the group. Bold or stupid, hard to say which. He rode hard toward the house, pistol drawn, yelling something incomprehensible. Maybe he thought he could intimidate them. Maybe he was just drunk. Either way, it was his last mistake. Eli's rifle cracked the sound impossibly loud in the confined space of the adobe. Through the window, Lila saw the drifter jerk backward in his saddle hat, flying off body tumbling to the ground in a cloud of dust. His horse, spooked, bolted toward the horizon, stirrups flapping empty. "One," Eli said flatly, already reloading. The remaining 3 riders scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Return fire came quickly. Bullets thudding into the adobe walls, shattering one of the shutters, sending splinters flying through the interior. Lila ducked instinctively, her heart trying to climb out of her throat. "Stay down, but stay ready," Eli barked. "They're testing our defenses, seeing where we're positioned. Don't waste shots." More bullets slammed into the walls, creating small explosions of adobe dust. The light was fading fast now, the desert surrendering to night, and Lila knew that was bad for them. Darkness would make it easier for Jonas and his men to approach unseen to find weak points in their defenses. "Boone!" Jonas shouted from somewhere in the darkness. "That was murder. You killed a man in cold blood. The law's gonna hear about this." "The law's 3 days' ride from here," Eli shouted back. "And you came to my land threatening violence. That's not murder, Creed. That's self-defense." "Self-defense." Jonas's laugh was wild, unhinged. "You're protecting a thief. She stole from me, stole my time, my money, your property." Lila's voice rang out before she could stop herself, surprising even herself with its strength. "That's what you're really angry about, isn't it, Jonas? Your property ran away. Your thing decided it was a person." Silence fell, broken only by the eternal wind and the nervous shifting of horses. Then Jonas spoke again, and his voice had changed. Gone was the mocking tone, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. "Lila," he said, drawing out her name like a knife across skin. "Lila, darling, you come out right now, and I promise I'll go easy on you. Just a beating, nothing permanent. But you make me come in there. You make me work for it. And what happens next is on you. You understand me, wife." The word wife dripped with venom and possession, and Lila felt 3 years of fear try to overwhelm her. Every instinct screamed at her to submit, to obey, to make herself small and quiet and invisible. That's how you survived Jonas. That's how you made it through another day. But she wasn't in the shack anymore. She was in Eli Boone's ranch holding a loaded gun with a man beside her who'd killed to protect her and would do so again. She wasn't alone. She wasn't helpless. "I'm not your wife," she shouted back, her voice cracking but fierce. "I'm not your anything. I'd rather die free than live one more day under your hand." "That can be arranged," Jonas roared, and the gunfire resumed in earnest. Bullets punched through what remained of the shutters, ricocheted off the stone fireplace, shattered the coffee pot on the stove. Eli returned fire methodically, each shot deliberate and aimed, making Jonas and his men keep their heads down. "They're trying to pin us," Eli said, his voice tight with concentration. "Keep us focused on the front while someone circles around back. Lila, watch that rear window. Anyone tries to come through, you shoot them. Don't hesitate." Lila nodded and repositioned herself, keeping low. Her pistol trained on the small window that looked out on the back of the property. Her hands were shaking, but her grip was firm. She thought about Jonas's smile, about the casual cruelty in his eyes when he hit her. She thought about 3 years of silence and submission. She thought about Tommy Dawson's words. It didn't end well for her, and wondered how many women had died in shacks and ranches across this territory, their names forgotten, their stories untold. "Not me," she thought fiercely. "Not today." Movement flickered at the rear window, a shadow detaching itself from the larger darkness, moving with predatory intent. Sal Martinez, his scarred face visible for just a moment in the starlight. He was trying to pry the window open, his knife working at the frame. Lila's finger found the trigger. 20 feet, Eli had said. Make it count. She steadied her breathing the way he'd taught her, aimed for center mass, and squeezed. The pistol's report was smaller than the rifle's, but still deafening in her ears. Through the ringing, she heard a grunt of pain, saw Sal stagger backward, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to drive him away from the window, cursing in rapid Spanish. "Good!" Eli shouted without taking his eyes off the front. "You bought us time. Reload." Lila's hands fumbled with the ammunition, but muscle memory from Eli's training took over. She reloaded, chambered around, kept her eyes on the window. Sal was gone, but he'd be back. Men like him didn't quit just because they were bleeding. The gunfight settled into a brutal rhythm, bursts of fire from outside, measured responses from within. Then tense silence as both sides repositioned and reloaded. The adobe walls were holding, but barely. Bullets had carved chunks out of them, and Lila knew that if this went on long enough, the walls would crumble and their cover would disappear. "We need to break their momentum," Eli said, his face grim in the flickering light from the fireplace. "Make them think twice about pressing the attack." He grabbed a lamp, quickly fashioned a crude torch from a piece of cloth and lamp oil. "When I open this door, I'm going to throw this at their position. The light will blind them and maybe catch something on fire. Soon as I throw, you pour fire through that front window. Don't aim, just shoot. Make them scared." "Eli, they'll cut you down the second you open that door." "They'll try," he agreed. "But I'm fast and I'm mean, and I'm fighting for something that matters. That counts for more than most folks realize." He positioned himself by the door torch in one hand, rifle in the other. "On 3. 1. Wait." Lila scrambled toward him, her wounded feet screaming in protest. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "If you die out there, I'm coming with you. You understand I'm not going back to Jonas. I won't." Eli's expression softened for just a moment. Something like tenderness flickering in his eyes. "You're going to live, Lila Warren. That's an order. You're going to live free and die old, and you're going to forget there was ever a man named Jonas Creed or a shack in the desert. You hear me?" She wanted to argue, to insist they'd both survive or both die, but there was no time. Eli was already counting. 2. 3. He yanked the door open and hurled the flaming torch in a high arc toward where Jonas and his men had taken cover. The torch spun through the darkness like a falling star trailing fire and smoke. Lila didn't watch where it landed. She was already at the window, pistol extended, firing into the night. 1 shot, 2, 3. She didn't aim, didn't even know if she hit anything. She just filled the darkness with lead and fury. Eli's rifle barked twice more. Then he was back inside, slamming the door, breathing hard, but grinning like a wolf. Hit something. I heard someone scream. Outside, the torch had landed in a patch of dry brush, and flames were spreading fast, casting wild shadows across the desert floor. In the firelight, Lila could see Jonas and his remaining men, just two now, she realized with a jolt. Where was the third? The spreading flames were forcing them to reposition, driving them away from their cover. Boone! Jonas's voice was ragged now, stripped of its earlier confidence. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't... His words cut off as another rifle shot cracked across the desert, but this one didn't come from the ranch house. It came from behind Jonas's position from the direction of the road. One of Jonas's men, Dutch Keller, Lila thought jerked and fell, his rifle clattering to the ground. What the hell? Eli moved to the window, peering into the darkness beyond the spreading fire. A rider approached at a gallop, and for a heart-stopping moment, Lila thought it was reinforcements for Jonas. But then the rider called out, his voice young and frightened and determined. Mr. Boone, it's Tommy Dawson. Don't shoot. That damned fool boy, Eli breathed, but there was admiration in his voice. He came back. Tommy reined his horse to a sliding stop near the ranch house, his rifle still smoking. I couldn't just leave not knowing what might happen. He swung down from the saddle, stumbling in his haste. Jonas killed my ma, Mr. Boone, years ago when she tried to leave her husband. I didn't know until tonight, but I asked around town and people told me. He was the one who... Get inside, Eli roared as bullets kicked up dust around Tommy's feet. The boy ran, and Eli pulled him through the door, slamming it shut behind him. Tommy stood there gasping, eyes wild, still clutching his rifle. I'm sorry, I should have told you earlier, but I didn't know. I swear I didn't know until... It's all right, boy. Eli gripped Tommy's shoulder firmly. You're here now. That's what matters. You know how to use that rifle. My pa taught me before he died. I'm not great, but I'm good enough. Good enough is good enough. Eli positioned Tommy at a window. We've got them down to 2 Jonas and Sal Martinez, but 2 desperate men are still dangerous. They'll either run or make one last push. My money's on the push. He was right. The fire had died down to embers now, the darkness reasserting itself, and in that darkness, Jonas and Sal were moving. Lila could hear them, could sense the shift in the air that meant violence was coming. They'd lost half their men and gained nothing. Pride and rage would demand satisfaction, even if satisfaction meant death. They're coming, she whispered, her pistol feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. Let them come, Eli said grimly. He'd reloaded everything, positioned himself at the central window with clear lines of fire to both sides of the house. Tommy was pale but determined, his rifle steady. And Lila. Lila was just trying to remember how to breathe. The attack came from 2 directions simultaneously. Sal hit the back window again, having circled around through the darkness, while Jonas charged the front door like a man possessed, roaring incoherently. He fired as he came, bullets punching through the door, one of them grazing Eli's shoulder and spinning him partially around. Eli! Lila screamed, but he was already recovering, raising his rifle with his good arm. At the back window, Sal had gotten it open and was trying to force his way through his scarred face, twisted with effort and pain. Blood soaked his shirt from where Lila had shot him earlier, but adrenaline and desperation kept him moving. Lila fired again this time, aiming carefully, and Sal jerked backward with a cry. He clutched at the window frame, trying to pull himself through anyway, and Lila fired again. And again. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Tommy was suddenly beside her, his rifle coming up. Get down, ma'am! He fired point blank into Sal's chest, and the Mexican fell away from the window, his body hitting the ground outside with a heavy thud. At the front of the house, Jonas had reached the door. He kicked it once, twice, the wood splintering under his boot. Eli fired through the door, and Jonas screamed, but it didn't stop him. The door burst inward in an explosion of broken wood, and Jonas Creed stood in the doorway, backlit by starlight, blood streaming from his leg, but his pistol still raised. Lila! He roared, his eyes wild and glassy. You're mine. You'll always be mine. Time seemed to slow. Lila saw Eli trying to bring his rifle around despite his wounded shoulder. She saw Tommy swinging his own rifle toward Jonas, but knowing he'd be too slow. She saw her husband, her tormentor, silhouetted in the doorway like death incarnate, his finger tightening on the trigger. And she saw with perfect clarity what she had to do. She stepped into Jonas's line of sight, her empty pistol useless in her hand, but her voice strong and clear. "No," she said simply. "I'm not." Jonas's pistol swung toward her, and for one crystalline moment, Lila thought this was how it ended. That she'd escaped the shack only to die in this ranch house, that freedom had lasted mere hours before being snatched away. But Eli's rifle cracked once more, the sound impossibly loud in the confined space. Jonas's head snapped back his pistol, discharging harmlessly into the ceiling, and then he was falling, crumpling to the floor in a spreading pool of dark blood. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Lila stood frozen, staring at the body of the man who'd been her husband, watching the life drain out of him with each weakening heartbeat. His eyes found hers, and for just a moment she saw something in them, not love or regret or even hatred. Just surprise. Surprise that this was how it ended, that his property had finally broken free. Then Jonas Creed's eyes went empty and still, and Lila Warren was a widow. "Is he—" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "Is he dead?" Eli moved to Jonas's body, checked for a pulse, then nodded grimly. "He's dead." He looked up at Lila, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes clear. "It's over, Lila. It's done." She should feel something, shouldn't she? Relief, guilt, sadness. But all she felt was numb, hollowed out, empty as the shack she'd fled from. Her legs gave out and she sank to the floor, still clutching her empty pistol, still staring at Jonas's body. Tommy rushed to her side. "Mrs. Creed, Mrs. Warren, are you all right? Are you hurt?" "I'm—" The words wouldn't come. How did you explain that you weren't hurt, but you were broken anyway, that you'd wanted freedom, but the price of it was staining the floorboards red? Eli knelt beside her, his good hand gentle on her shoulder. "Breathe, Lila. Just breathe. The hard part's over." But it wasn't. Not really. The hard part was just beginning, because now she had to figure out how to live in a world where Jonas was dead, where she was free, where the future was no longer predetermined by a man's fists and whiskey breath. Now she had to figure out who Lila Warren was when she wasn't busy surviving. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying away the smell of gunpowder and blood. In Boot Hill Cemetery, Sarah Boone rested peaceful, unaware that her husband had fought his second battle for love and won. And in the doorway of the small adobe ranch, Jonas Creed lay dead, his rage finally silenced, his ownership finally broken. Lila closed her eyes and let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of release, of 3 years of fear and pain finally finding an exit. They were tears that tasted like freedom, bitter and hard-won and precious beyond measure. "It's all right," Eli murmured, his arm around her shoulders. "It's all right to cry. It's all right to feel whatever you're feeling. You earned that right." Tommy had moved to the door, was looking out at the bodies scattered across the desert floor. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. With them, "We bury them at dawn," Eli said. "All of them. Then we ride to Tombstone and tell the sheriff what happened. Let the law sort it out." He glanced down at his bleeding shoulder, seemed to notice it for the first time. "And maybe find a doctor while we're at it." "You're hurt," Lila said, her voice thick with tears. "Eli, you're bleeding." "I've had worse." But his face was pale, and when he tried to stand, he swayed. Tommy rushed to support him, helping him to the bed. Lila wiped her eyes, forced herself to focus. Eli had protected her, had taken a bullet for her, and now he needed help. She could fall apart later. Right now, she needed to be strong. She moved to his side, her wounded feet screaming in protest, but her hands steady as she helped peel away his blood-soaked shirt. The bullet had carved a furrow across his shoulder, painful and bloody, but not fatal. She found clean cloth water, began cleaning the wound with hands that shook only slightly. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "Any of this. You could have turned me away at Boot Hill. You could have—" "I couldn't—" Eli interrupted, his eyes meeting hers. "Not after Sarah, not after learning what it cost to stand by and do nothing." He winced as she pressed cloth to the wound. Besides, you were worth fighting for, worth bleeding for. The words settled into Lila's chest, warm and unexpected. Worth fighting for. When had anyone ever thought her worth anything except the labor she could provide, the submission she could offer? Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for— Her voice broke. For giving me a chance to be free. Eli's good hand found hers squeezed gently. You gave yourself that chance, Lila. You walked out that door. You chose to run. I just made sure you had somewhere to run to. Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly from where he stood by the window. I should probably check the perimeter. Make sure there's no one else out there. Good thinking, boy. Eli nodded toward his rifle. Take that with you. And Tommy, you did good tonight. Real good. Your ma would be proud. Tommy's eyes glistened, but he blinked the moisture away quickly. Thank you, sir. I'm glad I came back. He grabbed the rifle and slipped out into the darkness, leaving Eli and Lila alone with the dead. Lila finished bandaging Eli's shoulder, her movements automatic, mechanical. She could feel Jonas's body behind her, could sense his presence, the way you sense a storm even after it's passed. She forced herself not to look, not to think about the blood cooling on the floorboards, or the way his eyes had gone empty and still. You'll have nightmares, Eli said quietly, reading her thoughts. About tonight. About him. That's normal. That's the price we pay for violence, even violence that was necessary. Do you have nightmares? Lila asked. About the war. Every night. Eli's smile was sad. Sometimes about the men I killed, sometimes about the men I couldn't save, sometimes about Sarah dying while I held her hand and couldn't do anything except watch. He looked at her steadily. But I also dream about the mornings after, about coffee at sunrise and the way the light hits the desert in small moments of peace between the storms. The nightmares don't cancel out the good dreams, Lila. They just exist alongside them. Lila nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. The nightmares and the good dreams existing alongside each other. Maybe that's what life was, not the absence of pain, but the presence of something worth the pain. Not the elimination of fear, but the choice to act despite it. What happens now? She asked. After we go to Tombstone, after we talk to the sheriff, what happens to me? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the doorway where Jonas lay. That depends on what you want to happen. You're free now, truly free. You can go anywhere, be anyone. The world's open to you in a way it wasn't before. I don't have any money. I don't have family. Lila's voice wavered. I don't know how to be free, Eli. I've been someone's property for so long I don't remember how to be just me. Then you learn, Eli said simply. One day at a time, one choice at a time. And if you need somewhere to figure things out, somewhere safe, this ranch is always open to you, for as long as you need. The offer hung in the air between them, generous and terrifying in equal measure. Lila looked around the blood-stained room at the shattered door and bullet-scarred walls at the body of her dead husband cooling in the doorway. This place should feel like a battlefield, like a grave, but somehow, impossibly, it felt like home. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd like to stay, at least for a while, until I figure out who I'm supposed to be. Eli smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something younger, lighter. Then stay. Stay as long as you need. We'll rebuild the door patch, the walls bury the dead, and then— He paused. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together. Together. The word was a promise and a prayer, a lifeline thrown across the darkness. Lila took Eli's hand, felt the warmth and strength in his calloused palm, and for the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. Outside, Tommy called out that the perimeter was clear, that no more riders were coming. The danger had passed. The battle was won. And in the small adobe ranch at the edge of Boot Hill Cemetery, 2 broken people began the slow work of healing. The bodies would be buried at dawn. The sheriff would be notified. The law would investigate and ultimately rule the killing justified self-defense on private property against armed men making threats. Jonas Creed would be remembered as what he was, a violent drunk who died as he lived trying to control something that had never been his to own. But all of that would come later. Right now, in the deep dark of the Arizona night, Lila Warren sat beside Eli Boone and watched the stars through the bullet-scarred windows. She was wounded and exhausted and blood-stained. She was a widow and a survivor, and a woman who'd fired a gun to defend her freedom. She was alive, and that in the end was everything. Dawn came slow and red across the desert, painting the Arizona sky in shades of blood and fire. Lila stood at the window, watching the sun climb her body, aching in places she hadn't known could ache her mind, turning over the events of the night like stones in a river. Behind her, Eli slept fitfully in the chair, his bandaged shoulders stark white against his dark shirt. Tommy had dozed off near the door, his rifle still cradled in his arms, young face, peaceful in sleep despite the violence he'd witnessed. And in the doorway, covered now with a blanket Tommy had found, lay Jonas Creed. Still. Silent. Dead. Lila forced herself to look at the blanket-covered shape, forced herself to acknowledge what it meant. Her husband was dead. The man who'd terrorized her for 3 years, who'd turned marriage into a prison and love into a weapon, he was gone. She'd watched Eli's bullet take him, watched the light leave his eyes, watched him fall like a tree, finally cut down after years of rot. She should feel guilty. That's what good women did, wasn't it? Mourned their husbands, even the cruel ones. Wept for the dead, even when the dead had made their lives hell. But Lila felt no guilt, no grief. Only a strange emptiness where fear used to live, and beneath that something that might have been the first fragile shoots of hope. "You're awake early." Eli's voice was rough with exhaustion and pain. He shifted in the chair, wincing as his wounded shoulder protested the movement. "Couldn't sleep," Lila admitted. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw—" She stopped, unable to finish. "I know." Eli stood, carefully moving to her side at the window. The sunrise painted his weathered face in gold and shadow, making him look older and younger all at once. "The first man I killed, I was 19. Confederate soldier couldn't have been more than 17 himself. I see his face sometimes even now. 24 years later, and I still see his face." "Does it get easier?" Lila asked quietly. "No," Eli said with brutal honesty. "But you get stronger, strong enough to carry it, strong enough to remember why it was necessary and still wish it hadn't been." He looked at the blanket-covered body. Jonas Creed made his choices. He chose violence. He chose cruelty. And last night he chose to come here with guns and threats. What happened to him, that was on him, not you. Tommy stirred, blinking awake, his hand automatically checking his rifle before his eyes fully opened. Soldier's instinct, even in one so young. "Morning," he mumbled, scrubbing at his face. "I dreamed it was all—" He stopped, seeing Jonas's body reality crashing back. "Oh, it wasn't a dream." "No," Eli agreed. "It wasn't. But it's over now, boy. The fighting's done." He moved toward the door, testing his shoulder. "We've got work to do, bodies to bury, a trip to Tombstone to make. The sooner we handle this proper, the sooner we can all move forward." They worked through the morning, the three of them preparing the dead for burial. It was grim work, made worse by the heat that came with the climbing sun. Tommy rode out to gather the bodies scattered across the desert, 4 men in total, including Jonas. 4 lives ended in the span of an hour, 4 stories cut short by violence and greed, and the particular kind of madness that came from believing other people were property. Eli and Tommy dug the graves in the hard-packed earth beyond the corral, taking turns with the single shovel, sweat streaming down their faces despite the morning cool. Lila watched from the porch, unable to help with her wounded feet, but unwilling to hide inside. She'd spent 3 years hiding. She was done with that. "Should we—" Tommy paused, leaning on the shovel. "Should we say words over them? Some kind of prayer or something?" Eli considered this, his expression thoughtful. The Drifter and Dutch Keller, they were just hired guns. Probably got families somewhere who'll never know what happened to them. "I reckon they deserve a few words." He glanced at Jonas's blanket-wrapped body, his jaw tightening. "As for Creed and Martinez, God can sort them out. I'm not inclined to speak for men who dealt in cruelty." They buried the 4 men as the sun reached its zenith, the desert heat pressing down like a physical weight. Eli spoke briefly over the Drifter and Dutch, commending their souls to whatever waited beyond, and expressing hope that they'd find more peace in death than they'd apparently found in life. For Jonas and Sal, he simply filled in the graves without ceremony, the sound of earth hitting earth, final and absolute. Lila stood at the edge of Jonas's grave, looking down at the disturbed earth, trying to feel something. But there was nothing, just emptiness and exhaustion and the strange, disorienting sensation of being untethered from the anchor that had held her in place for 3 years. She was adrift now, unmoored, floating in space with no idea which direction was up. "It's done," Eli said quietly, coming to stand beside her. His good hand found hers squeezed gently. "He can't hurt you anymore, Lila. Not ever again." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. It wasn't grief, she was certain of that. It was something else. Release, maybe. Or the terrifying freedom that came with having no more excuses, no more reasons to stay small and silent and afraid. They rode for Tombstone an hour later, Eli and Tommy on horseback, while Lila rode in a small wagon Eli kept for trips to town. Her feet couldn't handle stirrups yet, and besides, someone needed to drive the wagon that carried their supplies and the blood-stained evidence of last night's violence. Better her than either of the men who'd already done so much. The ride was long and hot, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions, and Lila found herself thinking about the last time she'd traveled this road. 3 years ago, newly married, sitting beside Jonas in a borrowed wagon, believing she was heading toward a future full of promise. She'd been so young then, not in years just 22 now, only 19 then, but in experience. She'd thought she knew what marriage meant, what partnership looked like. She'd thought love was enough to overcome any obstacle. 3 years had taught her different. 3 years had taught her that love without respect was just another word for possession, and partnership without equality was just slavery with a wedding ring. "You're quiet," Tommy observed, riding alongside the wagon. His young face was troubled, marked by shadows that hadn't been there yesterday. War did that to people, aged them from the inside out, carved wisdom into their bones whether they wanted it or not. "Just thinking," Lila replied, "about how different everything looks now. The same road, but I'm not the same person traveling it." Tommy nodded slowly. "My ma used to say that life doesn't change us, it just reveals who we always were underneath. You think that's true?" Lila considered this, her hand steady on the wagon reins. "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe we're always becoming new versions of ourselves, and the old versions die quiet deaths we don't notice until we look back and realize we can't recognize who we used to be." "That's heavy thinking for a Tuesday morning," Eli called from where he rode slightly ahead, scouting the road. But there was warmth in his voice, and when he glanced back at her, his eyes held understanding. They reached Tombstone by mid-afternoon, the town sprawling and dusty and alive with the particular chaos of a frontier settlement. Cowboys and miners mixed on the streets, saloons spilled music and laughter into the dusty air, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked endlessly at something only it could see. It was civilization such as it was, and after the isolation of the desert, it felt overwhelming. The sheriff's office sat at the end of the main street, a squat adobe building with bars on the windows and a sign that had seen better days. Sheriff Marcus Webb was a thick-set man in his 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human stupidity imaginable. He listened to their story without interrupting his expression, neutral, taking notes in a cramped hand. "So you're saying Jonas Creed came to your ranch with 3 armed men?" Webb said when they'd finished threatened violence and you defended your property. It wasn't quite a question. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Eli replied evenly. "I've got a woman under my protection who fled an abusive marriage. Creed wanted her back. I refused. He attacked. I defended. That's the whole story." Webb's gaze shifted to Lila, taking in her split lip, the bruises yellowing on her face, her bandaged feet. "Mrs. Creed, that your version too—" "I'm not Mrs. Creed anymore," Lila said, her voice steady, despite the nervousness churning in her stomach. "Jonas is dead. I'm just Lila Warren now. And yes, that's my version. Jonas beat me for 3 years. I finally found the courage to run. He came after me. Mr. Boone protected me. That's the truth." Webb was quiet for a long moment, his pen tapping against his notebook. Finally, he sighed. "Look, I'm not going to lie to you folks. This is complicated. Man has a right to defend his property, and he has a right to shelter whoever he wants. But a husband also has certain legal rights regarding his wife, even if we don't like how he exercises them." He held up a hand as Eli started to protest. I'm not saying what Creed did was right. I'm saying the law is muddy on this, and there's folks in this town who knew Creed, who drank with him, who might not take kindly to his killing. Are you saying I should have let him take her? Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. Let him drag her back to that shack to beat her some more, kill her eventually. I'm saying, Webb rubbed his face wearily, I'm saying you did what you thought was right, and given the circumstances, I'm inclined to rule this a justified killing. Self-defense on private property. But there's going to be questions, there's going to be talk, and if any of Creed's friends decide they want revenge, he shook his head. That's not something I can control. So we just, what? Tommy spoke up, his young voice sharp with indignation. We just wait for someone else to come gunning for us. That's justice. That's frontier life, boy, Webb said bluntly. Justice is what you make it, and law is what you can enforce. I'll write this up as self-defense. I'll spread the word that anyone coming after you will answer to me, but I can't promise you'll be safe. I can't promise this is over. They left the sheriff's office an hour later, Eli's jaw tight with frustration, Tommy muttering darkly about corrupt lawmen and broken systems. Lila said nothing, but inside a cold certainty was forming. This wasn't over. Maybe it would never be over. Maybe she'd spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder waiting for the next man with a grudge and a gun or to come calling. We need supplies, Eli said, forcing his voice to lighten. Long as we're in town, might as well stock up. Ammunition, food, maybe some proper bandages for my shoulder and your feet, Lila. He managed a tired smile. And I reckon we could all use a decent meal. There's a restaurant over on 3rd Street that makes a beef stew that'll change your life. They split up Eli to the general store, Tommy, to the feed and grain, Lila, to the doctor's office, to have her feet properly examined and dressed. The doctor was an elderly man named Pierce, who'd seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything. He cleaned and bandaged her feet with gentle efficiency, asked no questions about the bruises on her face, and charged her nothing. Woman came through here last month, Dr. Pierce said as he worked. Husband had broken 3 of her ribs and her arm. She healed up, took her 2 children, and disappeared one night. Never found out where she went. He looked up at Lila, his eyes kind but sad. I hope she made it somewhere safe. I hope you do too. Thank you, Lila whispered, the kindness almost harder to bear than cruelty. Cruelty she understood. Kindness, genuine, uncomplicated kindness, felt foreign and precious and desperately fragile. She met Eli and Tommy at the restaurant, and they ate beef stew that was indeed life-changing, thick and rich and seasoned with herbs Lila couldn't identify. They ate in silence, too exhausted for conversation, but it was a comfortable silence. The silence of people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side, changed, but not broken. What now? Tommy asked when they'd finished pushing his empty bowl away. Do we just go back to the ranch? Pretend everything's normal? Nothing's going to be normal for a while, Eli said honestly. But yes, we go back to the ranch. We rebuild what got damaged in the fight. We tend the livestock and fix the fences and do all the ordinary things that need doing, because that's how you survive, Tommy. Not by dwelling on the violence, but by choosing to build something in its place. You sound like my ma, Tommy said softly. She used to say the best revenge against evil is living well. Your ma was a smart woman, Eli replied, and she'd be proud of what you did last night, coming back to help even knowing the danger. That took courage. Tommy's eyes glistened, but he blinked rapidly, forcing the emotion back. What about you, Miss Warren? He corrected himself quickly. What are you going to do? Lila had been asking herself the same question since dawn. What did she want to do? Where did she want to go? Who did she want to become now that the chains were finally irrevocably broken? I think, she said slowly, feeling her way through the words, I think I want to stay at the ranch for a while. Help Eli rebuild. Learn how to be strong instead of just surviving. And then, she paused, a small smile tugging at her lips. Then we'll see. Maybe I'll stay longer. Maybe I'll move on. But for the first time in 3 years, the choice will be mine. The choice is yours, Eli agreed quietly. Always, no matter what. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. The journey felt different this time, not a flight toward safety or a march toward violence, but simply a return home, because that's what the ranch had become in the span of a single night home. Not because of the building or the land, but because of what it represented. Choice, safety, the possibility of something better. When they arrived, the ranch looked different in the fading light. The door was still broken, the walls still scarred with bullet holes, but somehow these wounds felt like badges of honor rather than marks of shame. This place had been tested and had held. They had been tested and had held. "We'll start repairs tomorrow," Eli said, dismounting with a grunt of pain. His shoulder was bothering him. Lila could tell, but he wouldn't complain. Men like Eli never complained. They just endured. "Tonight we rest. We've earned it." But rest didn't come easy. After Tommy had bedded down in the small barn and Eli had checked the perimeter one final time, Lila found herself standing in the doorway, the repaired doorway hastily fixed with spare boards and nails staring out at the desert darkness. Somewhere out there, 4 men lay buried in unmarked graves. Somewhere out there, Jonas's shack sat empty, waiting for no one. Somewhere out there, the future waited, uncertain and terrifying and full of possibility. "Can't sleep." Eli's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him leaning against the wall, his bandaged shoulder visible in the lamplight. "Too much thinking," Lila admitted. "Too many questions." Such as... She was quiet for a moment, trying to articulate the thoughts that had been circling her mind all day. "What if it's not over?" she finally said. "What if Jonas had friends who come looking? What if the law changes its mind? What if I'm never really free because there's always someone else trying to own me, control me, put me back in a cage?" Eli moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Then we fight again," he said simply. "And again, and as many times as it takes. Because freedom isn't something you win once and keep forever, Lila. It's something you choose every day, something you defend every time someone tries to take it from you." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Eli agreed, "but it's also worth it. Sarah taught me that. She spent every day of our marriage choosing freedom, choosing to be her own person, to speak her mind, to build a life on her own terms. And when the fever took her," his voice caught, "she was free to the very end. That mattered. That meant something." Lila looked up at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd lost everything and still found the strength to fight for someone else's freedom. This man who asked nothing in return except the satisfaction of doing what was right. "Why are you really helping me, Eli?" she asked softly. "And don't say it's because of Sarah or because it's the right thing to do. Tell me the truth." Eli was quiet for so long Lila thought he might not answer. Then finally he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I'm lonely," he said simply. "Because I've been alone in this ranch for 2 years, talking to ghosts and livestock, watching my life slip away one empty day at a time. Because when I saw you in that cemetery, broken and bleeding and still fighting, I saw a reason to be something more than just a man waiting to die." He turned to face her fully. "I'm helping you because helping you helps me. Because maybe we can save each other. Is that truth enough?" It was more truth than Lila had expected, raw and honest and almost painful in its vulnerability. She reached out slowly, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining in the lamplight. "Yes," she whispered, "that's truth enough." They stood there in the doorway, 2 broken people holding on to each other as the desert wind sang its ancient song and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, repairs to make wounds, to heal questions to answer. But right now in this moment, they had this, each other, safety, the quiet beginning of something that might eventually become healing. "Tell me about her," Lila said after a while. "About Sarah. What was she like?" Eli smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "She was fierce," he said. "Small, not even 5 feet tall, but fierce as a wildcat. She'd argue with me about everything, politics, religion, how to plant the garden. But she also laughed like summer rain, sudden and bright and cleansing." His smile faded slightly. "She was afraid sometimes. The memories of her father, of what he'd done, they haunted her. But she never let the fear win. She chose joy anyway, chose life anyway." I want to be like that, Lila said quietly. Fierce and joyful and free. But I don't know how. I don't know where to start. You already started, Eli pointed out. You walked out that door. You ran barefoot through the desert. You pulled a trigger when your life depended on it. That's fierce, Lila. That's choosing life. He squeezed her hand gently. The rest, the joy, the freedom that comes with time, with small choices made over and over until they become who you are instead of what you're fighting to be. Small choices, one day at a time. It seemed impossible and achievable all at once, and Lila clung to that thought like a lifeline. She didn't have to become someone new overnight. She didn't have to have all the answers right now. She just had to wake up tomorrow and make one choice that was hers, and then another, and another. Thank you, she said again, knowing the words were inadequate, but meaning them with everything she had, for giving me a place to make those choices. Thank you, Aunt, Eli replied, for reminding me why making choices matters in the first place. They stood in the doorway until the cold drove them inside, until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Eli settled in his chair rifle across his lap, still keeping watch even in sleep. Lila curled up in the bed that smelled like lavender in Sarah's memory, and for the first time in 3 years she felt safe enough to dream of something other than survival. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky full of stars. In Boot Hill Cemetery, 5 fresh graves marked the price of freedom. 4 men who'd chosen violence and paid with their lives, and 1 woman who'd chosen peace and found something infinitely more precious. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on a world without Jonas Creed. Tomorrow, Lila Warren would wake up free. And that was worth every bullet, every scar, every nightmare that might follow. That was worth everything. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost like peace, though Lila learned quickly that peace was something you had to tend like a garden, carefully, constantly, never taking it for granted. She woke each morning to the sound of Eli moving around the ranch, already up before dawn to feed the livestock and check the fences. Tommy had stayed on sleeping in the barn and working for his keep, and together the 3 of them began the slow work of rebuilding what violence had broken. The door was the first priority. Eli and Tommy spent an entire day crafting a new one from lumber they hauled from Benson, measuring and cutting and fitting until it hung straight and true. Lila watched them work, her feet still too tender for much walking, but her hands busy with mending shirts with bullet holes, blankets torn in the chaos, the small domestic repairs that accumulated in any life, but which felt particularly meaningful now. She was stitching things back together literally and figuratively, one careful thread at a time. "You're good at that," Tommy observed during a break, nodding toward the shirt Lila was mending. "My ma used to sew like that, small, neat stitches. Said it was meditation, the repetition of it." "Your mother sounds like she was wise," Lila said, setting down the shirt to rest her eyes. "You loved her very much." "I did." Tommy's young face was shadowed with old grief. "Still do, I reckon. Love doesn't stop just because someone's dead. It just—" He searched for words. "It just becomes something you carry instead of something you share." Lila thought about that as she returned to her sewing. Love as burden and blessing both. She wondered if she'd ever loved Jonas really loved him, or if what she'd felt was just the desperate hope of a girl who'd wanted to believe in fairy tales. 3 years had beaten that hope out of her, replaced it with fear and survival instinct. But maybe there was room now for something else. Something real. By the end of the first week, Lila's feet had healed enough for her to walk without wincing, and she insisted on helping with the outdoor work. Eli was reluctant at first, worried she'd re-injure herself, but Lila was adamant. "I've spent 3 years being kept inside, being told what I could and couldn't do," she said firmly. "I'm not doing that anymore. If I want to mend fences and feed chickens and shovel horse manure, then that's what I'm going to do. You can either help me or watch me, but you're not going to stop me." Eli had laughed at that, a genuine laugh that lit up his whole face. "Yes, ma'am. I wouldn't dream of stopping you." And from then on, she was a full partner in the ranch work, learning the rhythms of animals and weather, the satisfaction of physical labor, the way exhaustion at the end of a day could be clean and good, instead of the heavy, hopeless exhaustion she'd known in Jonas's shack. The ranch itself seemed to respond to their efforts, as if the land recognized the difference between neglect, born of loneliness and neglect, born of cruelty. The garden that Sarah had planted years ago, which had gone mostly wild since her death, began to flourish again under Lila's attention. Tomatoes ripened on the vine beans climbed their poles. Herbs released their fragrance when brushed. Lila would kneel in the dirt, her hands deep in the earth, and feel connected to something larger than herself. Connected to Sarah, maybe, who'd knelt here before her. Connected to every woman who'd ever tried to grow something beautiful in hard soil. Sarah would like this, Eli said one evening, finding Lila in the garden as the sun set. Would like seeing someone care for it again. She used to say the garden was her rebellion growing things in a place that seemed determined to kill everything that wasn't already dead. I understand that, Lila replied, brushing dirt from her hands. The need to create something when everything around you is about destruction. She looked up at him, squinting against the golden light. Does it bother you me being here using her things, sleeping in her bed? No. Eli's answer was immediate and certain. Sarah wouldn't have wanted her things to gather dust. She'd have wanted them used, lived in, loved. And she'd have liked you, Lila, would have recognized a kindred spirit. They had settled into an easy companionship, the three of them, but Lila was acutely aware of the complications beneath the surface. She was a widow, technically legally free, but the circumstances of Jonas's death cast a long shadow. Gossip traveled fast in the territory, and she knew what people were saying. That she'd seduced Eli Boone. That she'd gotten her husband killed so she could take up with another man. That she was a Jezebel, a black widow, a woman who brought death wherever she went. The talk reached them through Tommy, who made weekly trips to Benson for supplies and came back each time with a darker expression and tighter jaw. They're saying terrible things, he reported after one such trip, his young face flushed with anger. Saying you planned the whole thing, Miss Warren, that you wanted Jonas dead and used Mr. Boone to do your dirty work. He slammed a sack of flour onto the table with more force than necessary. I told Billy Cutler he was a liar and a fool, and he took a swing at me, gave him a black eye for his trouble. Tommy. Lila's voice was gentle but firm. You can't fight everyone who says something ugly about me. You'll spend your whole life fighting. Then I'll spend my whole life fighting, Tommy shot back. What they're saying, it's not right. It's not true. You didn't do anything wrong. The truth and what people believe are often two different things, Eli said quietly. He was cleaning his rifle, a task he performed every evening with meditative care. We know what happened. Sheriff Webb knows what happened. That has to be enough. But it wasn't enough, not really. The weight of public opinion pressed down on them like the desert heat, inescapable and oppressive. Lila felt it most acutely when they went into town, the way conversation stopped when she walked by. The way women clutched their husbands' arms and steered clear of her as if violence and scandal were contagious. She held her head high, forced herself not to shrink or apologize for existing, but each judgment felt like a small cut accumulating until she was bleeding from 1,000 invisible wounds. I'm ruining your reputation, she said to Eli one night after a particularly difficult trip to Tombstone. They were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. People are talking about you too, saying you killed Jonas to take his wife, saying you're... She couldn't finish. Saying I'm a murderer, Eli supplied calmly. Let them say it. I've been called worse. During the war, men on both sides called me things that would make the devil blush. I survived their words then. I'll survive them now. But it's not fair to you. You saved my life. You gave me a place to heal. And this is how you're repaid with gossip and accusations. Eli set down the piece of leather he'd been working on, his full attention on her. Lila, listen to me. I didn't help you to preserve my reputation. I didn't take you in because I thought it would make people think well of me. I did it because it was right. Because you needed help, and I could provide it. The opinions of small-minded people in dusty towns, those don't matter. What matters is that you're alive, you're free, you're healing. Everything else is just noise. But what if the noise becomes more than noise? Lila pressed. What if someone decides to take justice into their own hands? Jonas had friends, had family somewhere maybe. What if they come for us? Then we'll deal with it. Eli's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused palm warm and solid. Together, same as we dealt with Jonas, same as we'll deal with whatever comes next. You're not alone anymore, Lila. You need to understand that. You're not alone. The words settled into her chest, warm and unfamiliar. Not alone. After 3 years of isolation, of being trapped in a shack with a man who saw her as property, the idea of genuine companionship felt almost frightening in its intensity. She'd forgotten what it meant to have someone on her side, someone who chose her, not because they owned her, but because they valued her. 3 weeks after Jonas's death, the second wave of trouble arrived in the form of a telegram delivered by the weekly mail rider. Eli read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass before handing it to Lila without a word. The telegram was from Jonas's brother Samuel Creed, sent from El Paso. It was brief and brutal in its simplicity. Heard about Jonas, coming for answers, be there in 1 week. He thinks I murdered Jonas. Lila whispered, the paper trembling in her hands. He's coming for revenge. He's coming for answers, Eli corrected, though his tone suggested he shared her concern. That's different. Maybe we can reason with him. Explain what really happened. You don't know the Creeds, Lila said, and something in her voice made both Eli and Tommy turn to look at her sharply. Jonas told me about his family, about Samuel especially. He's not like Jonas. He doesn't drink, doesn't lose his temper. He's cold, calculating. He's the kind of man who'll listen to everything you say, nod along, and then put a bullet in you when your guard is down. Then we don't let our guard down, Eli said simply. We prepare, we watch, and we hope for the best while planning for the worst. The week that followed was tense, every moment stretched thin with anticipation. They reinforced the ranch's defenses, checked and rechecked their ammunition, took turns on watch through the nights. Tommy wanted to ride to Tombstone and alert the sheriff, but Eli vetoed the idea. Webb can't do anything about a man who hasn't committed a crime yet, he pointed out. Samuel Creed has every right to visit the territory, every right to ask questions about his brother's death. We can't arrest a man for thoughts and intentions. We can only be ready if those intentions turn violent. Lila threw herself into work during those days, needing the physical exhaustion to quiet the fear churning in her stomach. She weeded the garden with savage intensity, repaired every piece of clothing that needed mending, scrubbed the ranch house until it gleamed. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. On the 6th day, as she was hanging laundry to dry in the desert heat, Tommy came running from his position on the ridge where he'd been keeping watch. "Riders," he called. "3 of them coming from the east." Eli appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, his face set in grim lines. Lila inside. Now! But Lila was tired of hiding, tired of being protected like something fragile that might break. She'd survived Jonas's fists and his bullets. She'd pulled a trigger to defend her freedom. She wasn't going to cower in the house while men decided her fate. "No," she said firmly. "I'm staying. If Samuel Creed wants answers, he can hear them from me directly." Eli looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he simply nodded and positioned himself beside her rifle, ready but not raised. A message. We're prepared, but not hostile. Yet. The 3 riders approached slowly, and as they drew closer, Lila could make out their features. The man in the center was clearly Samuel Creed. He had Jonas's build, Jonas's dark hair, but his face was harder, more controlled. The other 2 were hired guns, probably their eyes scanning the ranch with professional assessment. Samuel dismounted 20 feet from where they stood, his hands carefully away from his guns. He wore 2, Lila noted, tied down like a professional gunfighter. His eyes found her immediately, and she met his gaze without flinching. "Mrs. Creed." Samuel said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I believe you have something that belonged to my brother." "If you mean my life," Lila replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, "then you're mistaken. My life never belonged to Jonas. It belongs to me. It always has." Samuel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or reassessment. "Jonas sent me letters," he continued. "Told me about his wife, how beautiful she was, how ungrateful, how she didn't appreciate the life he'd given her." His gaze shifted to Eli. "You must be Eli Boone, the man who killed my brother." "I'm the man who defended his home against an armed attack," Eli corrected calmly. Your brother came to my ranch with 3 hired guns, threatened violence if I didn't hand over a woman who'd fled his abuse. I gave him a choice: leave in peace or face the consequences. He chose violence. What happened after that was on him." "That's your version," Samuel said. "Jonas's friends tell a different story. They say you stole his wife, seduced her, killed him to cover it up." "Jonas's friends are liars." Tommy spoke up, his young voice sharp with indignation. "I was here. I saw what happened. Mr. Boone is telling the truth." Samuel's gaze moved to Tommy, assessing. "And you are Tommy Dawson. My mother was Ellen Dawson. Your brother killed her 8 years ago when she tried to leave her husband. Beat her to death in an alley in Tucson. So forgive me if I don't have much sympathy for Jonas Creed's memory." The words hung in the air like smoke. Samuel went very still, and for the first time real emotion crossed his face, something that might have been shame or regret or anger, hard to tell which. "I didn't know about that," Samuel said finally. "Jonas never mentioned—" He stopped, shook his head. "But then Jonas never mentioned a lot of things. He had a talent for omission." "Your brother was a violent drunk," Leela said, her voice steady, despite the fear thrumming through her veins. "He beat me for 3 years, controlled every aspect of my life. I finally found the courage to run, and he came after me with murder in his eyes. Eli Boone saved my life. That's the truth. You can believe it or not, but it won't change what happened." Samuel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he removed his gun belt and handed it to one of his companions. "I came here ready to kill someone," he admitted. "Came here thinking my brother was the victim. But I'm looking at your face, Mrs. Creed, at those bruises, at that split lip, and I'm hearing what this boy said about his mother, and I'm starting to think maybe I didn't know my brother as well as I thought I did." He moved closer, and Eli tensed, but Samuel's hands remained empty, non-threatening. He looked directly into Lila's eyes, and she saw intelligence there and something like sorrow. "Did Jonas beat you?" he asked bluntly. "Yes," Lila answered without hesitation. "Regularly, brutally, for 3 years." "Did you love him ever?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about lying, about softening the truth, but something in Samuel's face made her choose honesty instead. "I thought I did when we married, but whatever I felt died the first time he hit me. After that, I just survived." Samuel nodded slowly. Something settling in his expression, a decision reached, a conclusion drawn. "My father beat my mother," he said quietly. "Every day of their marriage, near about. Jonas and I grew up watching it, learning that's how men treated women. I swore I'd be different, went west to get away from it, to build a different kind of life. But Jonas—" His voice roughened. "Jonas became what we'd both run from, and I didn't see it, didn't want to see it." He turned to Eli, held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Eli took it, and they shook a formal acknowledgement of understanding, if not quite friendship. "I'm sorry for your loss," Eli said, and he seemed to mean it. "Even knowing what Jonas was, I'm sorry you had to lose your brother this way." "So am I," Samuel replied. "But I reckon he made his choices, and choices have consequences." He looked back at Lila. "Mrs. Creed, Miss Warren, I'm not here to cause you more pain. I can see you've had enough. I just needed to know, needed to hear it for myself. And now I have." "What happens now?" Lila asked. "You're just leaving, that's it." "That's it," Samuel confirmed. "I'll spread the word that my brother's death was justified, that you were defending yourself and Mr. Boone was defending his property. Won't stop all the talk, but it might quiet some of it." He collected his gun belt from his companion, strapped it back on. "I'll also make sure his friends know to leave you alone. The Creed name still carries some weight in these parts. Might as well use it for something good." He mounted his horse, his companions following suit. Before riding off, he looked down at Lila one more time, his expression softer than it had been. "I hope you find peace," he said simply. "I hope you find the life my brother tried to steal from you, and Miss Warren." He tipped his hat. "I'm glad you survived him. Glad you had the strength to run." They rode away, disappearing into the desert haze, and Lila felt something inside her chest loosen, a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged until it released. It wasn't over, not completely. There would still be gossip, still be judgment from people who'd never understand. But Samuel Creed's endorsement was powerful. It changed the narrative, gave her story legitimacy, in a way that her own words never could. "Well," Tommy said, breaking the silence, "that went better than expected." "Much better," Eli agreed. He turned to Lila. His weathered face creased with concern. "You all right?" "I think so," Lila said slowly. And then with more certainty, "Yes, I'm all right. Better than all right, actually. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I feel like maybe I can actually move forward. Maybe the past doesn't have to define everything that comes next." "It doesn't," Eli said firmly. "The past informs us, teaches us, shapes us, but it doesn't own us. Not unless we let it." The weeks that followed were marked by small miracles and quiet victories. Word of Samuel Creed's visit spread through the territory, and while the gossip didn't disappear entirely, it changed tone. People who'd been quick to judge began to reconsider. The general store owner in Benson started greeting Lila by name again. The doctor in Tombstone asked after her healing feat with genuine concern, and slowly, carefully, life at the ranch settled into something that resembled normalcy. The garden flourished, producing more vegetables than 3 people could eat, so Lila started preserving and pickling filling jars with the bounty of the earth. The chickens laid eggs reliably, and Eli's small herd of cattle grew sleeker and healthier under consistent care. Tommy proved himself invaluable, his young energy and enthusiasm bringing new life to the ranch, and Eli started teaching him the skills he'd need to run his own place someday. As for Lila and Eli, their relationship evolved in ways both subtle and profound. They didn't speak of it explicitly, didn't define what they were becoming to each other. But the feelings were there in the way Eli's hand lingered on her shoulder when he passed, in the way Lila saved the best portions of dinner for him, in the comfortable silences that stretched between them as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Do you ever think about the future?" Lila asked one evening months after Jonas's death. They were alone. Tommy had ridden to Benson for supplies and wouldn't be back until morning. "About what comes next?" Eli was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon where the sun was painting the desert in shades of fire. "I used to think about it all the time," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I'd lie awake planning how I'd sell the ranch, where I'd go, what I'd do with whatever time I had left. But those plans always felt hollow, like I was just going through motions to avoid admitting I'd given up." "And now," Lila prompted gently, "now." Eli turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were warm and alive in a way they hadn't been when she'd first met him. "Now I think about fixing that broken section of fence on the north pasture, about expanding the garden next spring, about teaching Tommy everything I know before he strikes out on his own, about—" He paused, seemed to gather courage. "About whether you'll still be here to see any of it." Lila's heart stuttered. "Do you want me to be—" "More than I've wanted anything in a long time," Eli said honestly. "But I won't trap you here, Lila. Won't make you feel obligated or indebted. You're free. That was the whole point. So if staying feels like another kind of cage—" "It doesn't—" Lila interrupted, her hand finding his. "Being here with you, with Tommy, with this land, it doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like—" She searched for the right words. "It feels like I'm finally learning who I am when no one's telling me who to be. And I like who I'm becoming. I want to keep becoming her. Here. With you." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and tentative. 2 people who'd both lost so much, both survived so much testing, whether something new and fragile could grow in the spaces grief had carved. It tasted like possibility and hope, and the particular sweetness of choosing joy after knowing profound sorrow. "I'm not Sarah," Lila whispered when they finally pulled apart. "I can't be her. I can't replace what you lost." "I don't want you to be Sarah," Eli replied, his forehead resting against hers. She was her own person, and I loved her for who she was. You're your own person too, Lila, and I'm learning to love you for who you are, not as a replacement for what was, but as something new, something right here, right now. Right here, right now." The words that Jonas had slurred in his drunkenness, that Lila had whispered in her desperation, had transformed into something else entirely. A philosophy, a choice, a way of living that didn't dwell on the past's sorrows or the future's uncertainties, but simply existed in the present moment, grateful for whatever grace it offered. The months turned to seasons. Summer gave way to fall, the desert cooling, and the light taking on that particular golden quality that made everything seem touched by benediction. Lila's hands grew calloused from work, her body stronger, her spirit lighter. The nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, Eli was there to hold her until the darkness passed. Tommy eventually moved on, as they'd all known he would, taking a job at a ranch 3 counties over with dreams of saving enough to buy his own land someday. They threw him a farewell dinner. The 3 of them crowded around the table, and Lila felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this young man who'd become like a brother to her. "You take care of yourself," she told him fiercely, hugging him tight. "And you write to us. Let us know how you're doing." "I will," Tommy promised. "And you." He pulled back his young face, serious. "You keep being brave. Keep choosing freedom. My ma would have liked that. Would have liked you." After Tommy left, the ranch felt simultaneously emptier and more intimate. Just Lila and Eli now building a life together one day at a time. They didn't marry, not right away. Marriage felt complicated, weighted with Lila's recent past, and neither of them felt the need to formalize what they were building. They were partners, companions, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. But eventually, on a crisp November morning, nearly a year after Jonas's death, Eli asked properly. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just the 2 of them in the garden as Lila harvested the last of the fall vegetables. "Lila Warren," he said, and something in his tone made her look up from the tomatoes she was collecting. "Would you consider marrying me? Not because you need protection or security, you've proven you can provide those things for yourself, but because I love you, and I'd like to spend whatever time I have left on this earth as your husband." Lila set down the basket, stood slowly, her hands finding his. A year ago, she'd have been terrified by such a question. Marriage meant ownership, meant control, meant the slow death of autonomy. But this was different. Eli was different. And more importantly, she was different. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need to, but because I want to. Because you make me better. Make me braver. Make me want to build something lasting in this impermanent world." They married quietly in Tombstone with Sheriff Webb as witness and Dr. Pierce standing in as the person who gave the bride away. There was no fancy dress, no elaborate celebration, just 2 people making promises they intended to keep witnessed by friends who'd seen them through the darkness and now celebrated their light. The years that followed were marked by the ordinary miracles of any good life harvests and droughts. Laughter and arguments, moments of profound joy, and moments of piercing grief. They expanded the ranch slowly, bought more cattle, built a proper barn, even added a room to the house for the children they both hoped might someday fill it. Lila never forgot Jonas. The past couldn't be erased, only integrated, but his memory lost its power to hurt her. She visited his grave once years later and stood looking down at the simple marker Tommy had insisted they place there despite everything. "I don't forgive you," she told the grave quietly. "I don't think I ever will. But I'm grateful in a strange way for what surviving you taught me. About strength, about resilience, about the difference between existing and living." She turned away, not looking back. "I hope you found peace somewhere, but more than that, I hope I never think about you again." And mostly, she didn't. There were too many good things demanding her attention. Eli's laugh as they worked side by side, the way the desert looked at sunrise, the satisfaction of harvesting vegetables she'd planted with her own hands. There was the garden, always the garden where she felt connected to Sarah and to every woman who'd ever tried to grow beauty in harsh soil. On the evening of their 5th wedding anniversary, Lila and Eli sat on the porch as they did most evenings, watching the sun paint the sky in impossible colors. 5 years married, 6 years since that night she'd run barefoot through the desert. 6 years of learning how to be free, how to be loved, how to be herself. "Do you ever regret it?" Eli asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "Staying here, choosing this life." Lila thought about the question seriously, as it deserved. She thought about the hard work and the gossip and the nights when the nightmares still came. She thought about the calluses on her hands and the ache in her back after long days of labor. She thought about all the other lives she might have lived if she'd made different choices. "No," she said finally, certainly. "I don't regret it. Not for a moment. Because this life, this ordinary, beautiful, hard-won life, it's mine. I chose it. I built it. And every morning when I wake up, I get to choose it again." That's freedom, Eli. Real freedom. Not the absence of struggle, but the power to choose which struggles matter. Eli raised her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Lila Boone." "I love you too," she replied, and meant it with everything she was. The stars emerged one by one, constant and eternal, the same stars that had watched her run through the desert 6 years ago. The same stars that had witnessed violence and redemption, death and rebirth, the ending of one life and the beginning of another. Right here, right now, in this moment, Lila was exactly where she needed to be. Not because someone had put her there, not because she had no other options, but because she'd chosen it. Every day she chose it, and in a world that had tried so hard to break her, that choice, that daily, persistent, defiant choice, was everything. The wind sang across the desert, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Somewhere in Boot Hill Cemetery, the dead rested quiet, their stories ended. But here on this porch, two people who'd survived the darkness sat holding hands and planning their future modest dreams of expanded gardens and healthy livestock and long years together, growing old and weathered like the land itself. It wasn't a grand ending or a dramatic conclusion. It was just life messy and beautiful and hard-won and precious. It was the kind of peace that didn't announce itself with trumpets, but instead settled in slowly, one ordinary moment at a time, until you looked around and realized you'd built something worth keeping. And that Lila thought as the stars wheeled overhead and Eli's hand warmed hers, that was more than enough. That was everything. The story of Lila Warren, who became Lila Creed and then Lila Boone, who ran barefoot through the desert and pulled a trigger to defend her freedom, who learned that love didn't have to hurt and that strength wasn't the same as survival. That story didn't end in Boot Hill Cemetery beside 5 unmarked graves. It ended here in this moment, on this porch, with the desert wind singing its ancient song, and 2 people choosing joy despite everything they'd lost and everything they'd survived. Right here, right now, forever.